see you. Yes, thank you.
Well, Chief, it's great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I know that you took yeah. I can't see if everybody's seated. It looks like they are now.
Okay.
I know you took quite the circuitous route to get here, so thank you for making the extra effort.
Nothing was going to keep me in Washington, I assure you. It takes more than a canceled plane flight.
Yeah. Well, we're all the better for it, and we appreciate just how busy you've been. So, obviously, we're not going to talk about the work of the court, but maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of the frenzy that accompanies the end of a term and how you all managed to get through that.
Well, I mean, we're all lawyers, and like lawyers, we put things off to the last minute. You learn that early on, I guess. You know, there are 9 of us, and we all have to come together in one place or another on a lot of different cases, and people have their own ideas of a schedule. It's part of my responsibility to make sure we're on the same page to the extent we can, so we don't have all, 70 cases decided on the last day. And that's not easy, and people, work at different paces. So things were a little crunched toward the end this year. We try to space it out a little better next year, I suppose. But
not much happening at the court these days.
It's something new every day.
So I wanted to give you a moment, Chief, to talk about something sad that happened during the course of the term, and that is the passing of your dear friend and colleague, Justice David Souter, who served so honorably with the court for almost 20 years, I think. And so I'd give you the floor to talk a little bit about Justice Souter and his legacy and your friendship.
Sure. He was an extraordinary man, and I think of people ask me, well, what was he like, how to describe him, and the adjectives that come to mind are not ones that you would typically expect. But he was very kind, he was very decent, he was generous, he was caring. He would, when you had some unfortunate occurrence or some loss, you'd always get a note from him. And it wasn't, condolences, sorry for your loss and all that. It was 3 pages, either relating it to something in his life or reflecting on something, the sort of things that, you keep. I mean, if it was a loss 10 years ago, it's still in the drawer in the desk. Very, very thoughtful. He was never, as somebody said, he was never inadvertently rude. If he was, there was a good reason for it. I remember when he came in to tell me that he was leaving, and I said, well, David, I don't understand it. You're in perfect health. I thought you liked the work. What's the point? And he said, well, all that's true. He said, but I just don't like Washington. And I want to get back to New Hampshire, and I want to read some books. And that's what he did. And it takes a lot of perspective and balance to sort of understand, what you'd like, and if it's different than what, I mean, I don't know how many others on the court, and I'll include myself, would have that kind of perspective to appreciate that there's more to what you're doing and what's going on, and it might be a little quieter, but he loved New Hampshire, and he loved to read, and that's what he was going to do.
So I guess, yeah, like you, he didn't care much for the District of Columbia or Washington, D.C.
I use that as a shorthand for it's nice to get away from from work.
And I think you have that in common as well, that you found a place up north that gives you some solace and peace in the summer.
I'm not going to tell anybody where it is.
Chief, one of the things that we've talked about a little bit during the course of the conference is the state of the federal judiciary and issues related to judicial independence. And I know you've spoken out publicly when you thought it was appropriate to do so. I wonder if you might have some thoughts about judicial independence in the abstract and specifically as it applies to where we are as a judiciary today.
Sure. I mean, judicial independence is obviously the basic starting point. If you're going to have your dispute settled and resolved by somebody, you need to know that that person isn't, related either, by marriage, by whatever, by association with a particular entity before the court. That's simple. You worry that they're not going to be fair. But I think in our system of government, it's more than that. I mean, the only novel contribution of the Constitution to political science is the notion of an independent judiciary with the authority to say what the law is. There have always been chief executives. You know, the Iceland Parliament goes back 800 whatever years. But the Constitution is the first charter of government that says judges are going to tell us what the law is, and that's going to be binding. And as a critical element of the separation of powers, that means that the judicial branch has to be separate from the executive and from the legislative, and that's critical to how our whole system functions.
One of the other things that we've talked about is the unfortunate state of affairs with respect to threats that are being lobbed at judges. And I suppose it's not, perhaps not unique to this particular time and era, but it does seem to have gathered some intensity over the last few years and perhaps decades. I wonder if you would talk to us about how that, those kinds of threats impact the ability of judges to do their jobs.
Well, sure. I mean, the threats, you feel, well, that's not too bad. Somebody's saying this or that. But, of course, people pick up on them. And if you have somebody who's expressing a high degree of hostility to the court on whatever basis, I mean, I've been compelled over the past few years to make statements about people on one side of the aisle, their reviews on judges, and on the other side. It's not politically associated in any way with one side or the other. It becomes wrapped up in the political dispute that a judge who's doing his or her job is part of the problem. And the danger, of course, is somebody might pick up on that, and we have had, of course, serious threats of violence and murder of judges just simply for doing their work. So I think the political people on both sides of the aisle need to keep that in mind. There are ways, whether it's appeals or, if you think the law is being not followed, you can address that legislatively, but threatening the judges for doing their job is totally unacceptable, and people should be careful about doing that.
One of the things we've tried to focus on during my term as chief, and we've had some discussions about that here, is the importance of civic education and educating our fellow citizens on what it is that we do, how we do it, and why it's so vital that we have an independent, strong judiciary. Can you talk a little bit about what the importance of civic education?
Sure. I mean, many of us on the court have worked with Justice O'Connor when she was alive, and that was a big part of her work after she left the court. And Justice Sotomayor now kind of picking up a lot of it with the iCivics program. And it's surprising how many people don't understand how the role of the courts is different from the role of the other branches. So whatever type of anger or opposition you might express with respect to your congressperson or with respect to somebody associated with the executive, it's different when you're talking about the courts. I mean, the whole point is we don't have control over what the laws are going to be. We're not responsible that the other political branches have decided we need to do something about this issue or the other issue. We have a very direct and simple obligation, which is to interpret the law to the best of our ability. And the idea that we're responsible for whatever somebody is angry about, it just doesn't make any sense. And it's very dangerous to a system where you have the courts responsible for determining what the law is.
We talked about this a little bit before we came on. In addition to the threats, the importance of independence, there's also obviously the lifeblood of money and funding for the courts. And I know you've obviously been a big advocate of trying to ensure that we get adequate funding to do our job. What's your view of the current state of affairs, if you're willing to talk about that, about where we are and whether you think we're adequately funded?
Well, you have to be careful. You don't want to complain because the people you're complaining to have the purse strings and you want them not to be the target of criticism. On the other hand, the country gets good value out of the money they spend on the judicial branch. It's what is our budget? What, 10 billion almost?
10 billion, right?
Yeah, 9.4. That is less than a lot of, it's not a good analogy, but it's a good bit less than an aircraft carrier. Now, I know if you need an aircraft carrier, you want to have it, but if you need a judiciary too, and it's just sort of a perspective. You get a lot of value for the money that's spent on it, and so I think it's very important. It's very important for chief judges like yourself to make sure that message gets across, and we certainly do a very good job of not wasting the money.
Someone described it as a rounding error in the overall amount of the federal budget. And with respect to money, unlike you, Mr. Chief Justice, I did not get a pay raise when I became Chief Judge, so I'm just saying.
You know, we got the first pay raise the old-fashioned way by suing for it.
That's some really good lawyers.
Yes.
So how do you deal with criticism of you personally or the work that the court does? I mean, we're obviously not immune to criticism, and that's fair, but how do you manage to sort of take it in and just rise above it?
Well, I mean, it's part of what judges do, right? Every time we do something significant, somebody wins and somebody loses, and the loser generally doesn't have the same view of the process as the winner. And you'd like it to be informed criticism, but it's usually not. They're naturally focusing on the bottom line, who won and who lost, and you need to appreciate that that's just the nature of what you do. And also keep in mind, and I know the people in the midst of the litigation don't necessarily always do that, but what they're angry about or upset about is probably not that you applied the principle of justum generis in a context in which it had not been applied before. It's that they lost whatever they were looking for. I mean, it's in a sense, again, it's not. It would be good if people appreciated it's not the judge's fault that a correct interpretation of the law meant that no, you don't get to do this. And it may be an incorrect interpretation, but if that's their criticism, then of course that's, they can explain that, and maybe the Court of Appeals will take a different view. But if it's just venting because you lost, then that's not terribly helpful. But.
Yeah. So you've been chief now almost 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder what you thought about when you were confirmed in terms of your expectations about the work, and how that either has been confirmed or dispelled over the course of your tenure as one of the 9 on the Supreme Court. I will say that my experience over the years and my expectations were probably not as aligned as you might think, because when you're looking on the outside at the Supreme Court, you sort of see the results. You don't understand exactly all that goes into it. I argued cases before the Supreme Court, and I would argue, one, every couple of months. And you take a different perspective on it when you're, deciding or hearing arguments in 12 or 20 during that period. And I'm not embarrassed by asking questions where the answer is, well, as we said on page 3 of our opening brief, or something like that, because you appreciate that it's a whole different process, and the judges here, of course, would understand that. The dealings with other people is such an important part of it. I mean, you're part of a collegial group of extremely bright, hardworking people. And that should be an important part of how you go about doing your job. It's important to know and understand what Justice so-and-so is thinking about, because that will help you understand a little bit more about yours. And that's an interesting dynamic that plays out over the course of several months. So that's an important part of it. And I guess I didn't appreciate, not having been in that situation before, how significant that is.
and how you really do. Particularly at the end of the term, where we're often issuing opinions where there's a lot of sharp division and some sharp adjectives employed, you do lose sight of the fact that that's a culmination of a process where people are sitting down, they're getting information from the lawyers, they're getting information from the briefs, but they're also getting a lot of perspective from their colleagues. And I know, to a person, working hard to understand what somebody on the other side of an issue is thinking, and looking to see if there's some way to, if not bring things together, make the resolution as helpful as possible.
So, given the funnel approach that we have in our judiciary, inevitably some of the most contentious and controversial cases end up on your court, with huge consequences for those, not just the litigants, but the public and the nation at large. And obviously, we're all human, and I wonder, when you tackle those kinds of cases, understanding that the potential for consequences and the great gravitas that attaches to them, how you think about that in terms of consequences of decisions that you make and the court makes.
I don't want to be glib in the answer, but it's in a significant way. You don't think about it that much because we approach cases with our particular ways of analyzing things, and I don't start by saying, if this comes out this way, this thing is going to happen, and that's a bad thing, as opposed to that. You start out with your rules about construction, about the application of precedent, and all that. Now, that leads you to a result that you look at and say, well, that can't be. That's pretty bad. Then you want to go back and look at your suppositions. But, sometimes the result is certainly not maybe one you would have liked, and maybe it's one that seems pretty surprising. But you do have to keep in mind it's not your job to decide what the right result should look like. It's your job to do the legal analysis to the best you can. If it leads to some extraordinarily improbable result, then you want to go back and take another look at it. But I don't start from what the result looks like and go backwards.
It's probably good advice for all judges.
I try not to anyway. Who knows? But
so I want to go back to your tenure as chief, and I imagine there have been many challenges. But what do you think has been the most significant challenge that you've had to face during your time as chief?
It's an unusual position. You're supposed to be, as you are here, the chief, the leader in some sense, but you can't fire people if they don't follow you. You can't cut their pay. And so it's a different sort of skill. You have to be able to communicate what you think is important. And sometimes that means doing it 8 different ways in terms of how you interact with people. And I found early on, I joined the court with John Paul Stevens and Nino Scalia and Stephen Breyer, and I don't think their first reaction is, "Oh, good, I'm going to follow what he has to say." On the other hand, you do learn pretty quickly that sort of somebody has to take that, whether it's monitoring the discussion in the conference room or something else. And my colleagues have uniformly been gracious, I would say, over the last 20 years in giving me the benefit of the doubt and understanding, well, that might not be what I would do, but somebody's got to decide that for all of us, and he's doing the best he can. But it was the very first day I was going onto the bench, and John Stevens was the senior justice at the time and was standing next to me, and he said, "Boy, it's cold in my chambers." And I go, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And he said, "Yeah, I don't know why, but it's the thermostat seems to be set and it's really cold." Oh, it was only in the middle of the first argument that I realized, well, he wants me to do something about it. And sure enough, when I didn't even know who to call to help him out, but I would have thought that. But it is, and even just conducting discussion around the table. I mean, just pick 8 other people, sit them down, and say, "We're going to talk about this." somebody has to kind of, they pick a foreign person in the jury or something just to say, okay, what do you think, and and people are talking. You just have to sort it out. And I am very grateful for the fact that my colleagues generally recognize sort of that somebody has to do it, and this is the guy. And so they're very supportive in that respect.
So one of my predecessors, who you know well, Bill Traxler,
Yeah.
described as I was coming on to be chief. He said, Al, being chief is like walking through a cemetery. There are a lot of people under you, but no one's paying attention.
Well, Bill, I'm going to steal that right away. The next conversation I have with whomever, that is going to come up. But
So obviously you've got a lot left in the tank, but maybe you can talk about so far in the 20 years that you've been chief, what you count as your single greatest achievement. Other than the case work, obviously.
Yeah. That's you might have thought I would think about that a little longer, but I don't know. I really just kind of go from day to day, and in terms of reflecting on it, if you're talking about, I have my responsibilities as one of the justices, and if you're talking about this area of the law or that area of the law, or whether I thought that case came out the right way or not, that's one thing. But in terms of carrying out my responsibilities as the chief, I don't know that there's much that I can point to as a great accomplishment. But I don't know that there should be. I mean,
yeah.
What do you think it was?
I don't know. That's why I asked you. So I know you're you're a lover of history, and Supreme Court history in particular. So other than yourself, who would you count as the greatest Chief Justice of the Supreme Court?
Well, everybody has the same answer to that, and that's John Marshall, of course. That owed not only the fact that he really was brilliant, but everybody wanted to be his friend. He was the most engaging person, and brilliant and successful in carrying things. I mean, the achievement of Marbury versus Madison is enough to preserve his place in history, to understanding and explaining how the judicial function carries out. He gave life to the framers. What I think is perfectly clear, without Marbury, the role of the court as an independent branch of government, but he established it in Marbury in a way that was absolutely, Jefferson, who's the great rival on the other side, really thought he had Marshall and the Federalists in a vice, because they would have to rule in favor of Marbury and give him his position. That would really crystallize the opposition in the new republic against the courts. So instead, Marshall does this judicial jujitsu, and poor Marbury doesn't get his job, but in the course of that, he establishes the role of the court in deciding what the Constitution means. So, yeah, everybody would think he's clearly the model.
So in addition, Chief, to our judicial colleagues who are here this morning, there are a number of lawyers, both young and old, who are here. And obviously, before you went on the court, you had a wonderful career as a lawyer and appellate advocate. I wonder if you might give the benefit of your wisdom and advice to lawyers about the skills and attributes that are really critically important to success in the law.
Well, I always think it's useful to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's, you're arguing before. And some of that is, I actually already touched on. You need to keep in mind that that person is working on 12 cases that are just as important as yours, some more difficult, some less difficult, and you've probably spent several months getting ready for what is a very important responsibility of arguing before the court. But that doesn't mean, that doesn't mean that the person asking you the question has not done as much as he or she can with the additional responsibility of doing 11 or 12 more of what you've been doing. And that's why I always like when I'm did like when I was doing it, preparing people to do moot courts, do practice in front of lawyers. And I always wanted to do one near the end with lawyers who had done nothing other than just read the briefs. Wasn't their area of expertise. They didn't, have a lot of experience with it, because those are some of the questions you're going to get, and you need to be prepared. And if you're not, you're prepared to give a very intricate answer to a third-level question of sophistication, and you get a very simple question, and you haven't been prepared to answer it, and you sound like you don't really know what it's about. So that's, I think, very important, to put yourself in the shoes of the person you're trying to persuade.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, because part of our focus at this conference has been computer technology, and in particular the advent of artificial intelligence and related cybersecurity issues, which, for better or worse, we as a judiciary have to be cognizant of and understanding of, because there's so many actors, both foreign and domestic, that are trying to get at our systems. I suspect that's something that's top of mind for you as the Chief Administrator of the courts. I wonder if you might have some thoughts about that.
Well, the first thing I would do is talk to Justice Thomas. He is the most technologically sophisticated of the justices, and I do what he tells me to do. And we're doing things, your cell phones, it turns out, are extremely easy to compromise, and you need to do things like power them down every day. That gets out 90% of the hacking problems. Don't have them in the conference rooms and all that. So he knows all about that, and I generally try to do what he tells me to do on technology.
So when you were growing up, did you know from early on in your youth that you wanted to be a lawyer?
No, and I'm keeping an open mind on it.
So am I. Who were your role models in terms of teachers and or others who sort of put you on the path toward where you are today?
I would say, for me anyway, there came a significant turning point. Not when I went to law school, not when I was in law school, but the first clerkship I had after law school. I did not go to law school because I wanted to be a lawyer. I went to law school because there were no jobs for people who wanted to be historians or history professors. That's what I wanted to do. When I got to law school, I found out that I liked it enough, but I graduated in '79, and it was a pretty cynical period for at least people of my generation, I thought. And law was generally regarded not simply as something with some intrinsic value or usefulness, or it wasn't a noble calling. It was instrumental. It was always law and something else, and which is fine. But I was so fortunate to have a clerkship with Henry Friendly after law school, and that was like the road to Damascus for me, at least in this area. Here was somebody with the most extraordinary mind. He had the highest average in both college and law school at Harvard, and he was taking the law seriously as something ennobling in itself. And just to sit there and watch how he did that in terms of he had a photographic memory, so he would think of a case and it would be, Learned said something about that, it's in 185, and pull the reporter off of the shelf. And so as a law clerk, I wasn't doing much good. But just to see him engage with facts, engage with the law, and have something of a conversation with him as how he was going about it, how seriously he took it, and how satisfied he was when he had the opinion exactly where he thought it should be in terms of its relationship with the development of the law and all that. And you could see that, and sort of taking it from that raw material. And this was something that was right, and you saw what went into it. And that really was not an experience I'd had in law school. So having said that, it sort of changed my whole perspective on it. And I really did think that law was a worthwhile area to invest your life in.
So next week I'm going to be speaking to a group of Marine lawyers in D.C., and they sent me some questions that they had asked me to prepare for in advance. And one of them, and I guess I probably should not have been too surprised, but a little bit surprised, they wanted to know about work-life balance as a lawyer and how you managed to do that. And frankly, I don't know that I've managed to master that yet, but I'm hoping you can tell me what it is that I'm doing wrong? How do you manage the pressures of a job which is all-consuming, I imagine, and how do you decompress?
Well, for the longest time, the answer was for me pretty easy. Jane and I had a couple of wonderful children, and that takes up a lot of your time and energy. But they're grown. We'll see them in a couple of weeks when we get a little bit of a break, and that'll be fun. I like to read a lot, but I read things that it's all usually crime mysteries and things like that. Nothing elevating in any way, other than you want to find out who did it. And it's nice, the court I'm on, it's nice to have a system where we do have a set term, and we don't leave until we've decided all the matters pending before us. And obviously the work goes on, but we can get away for a little while, away from including each other. Justice Brandeis once said he could do the 12 months worth of work on the court in 10 months, but he couldn't do it in 12 months. And I think there was a lot of wisdom in that.
Well, we talked beforehand, and you had encouraged me to adopt that similar policy of putting up a firm deadline, and I see my colleagues probably running for the exits right now as I think about that. But there is a lot to be said for that. I think so. So, Mr. Chief Justice, I really want to thank you for your time here this morning. It's obviously a very challenging time for us as Americans and lawyers and the bar, but the fact that you took the time from your just really compressed schedule to be with us and to share your words of wisdom is something that I know we are all grateful for. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you would please thank our Chief Justice, John G. Roberts.
Well, thank you. Very much appreciate that. Thanks. That was great.
That was wonderful, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, great.